Hello and welcome to the room where it happens. Thank you for joining us this afternoon for a SAC-AC webinar on on-campus events. We're so excited that you were able to join us today and want to give you a few reminders about how to maximize your time today on the webinar. First, when you look at the bottom of your screen, you'll see a few buttons. Do us a favor and make sure that you are muted just in case. There's also a button for Q&A. If you have any questions during the time of the presentation, you're welcome to put those questions in. Our panelists will either answer them live in real time or they'll save time at the end to go back and answer individual questions. This is definitely an interactive session, so you'll also want to have your cell phone ready. There'll be some active group polling that'll happen to make sure that the webinar is customized to really address the individual needs of the people that are joining us today. Dave and I want to thank you for joining us on this SAC-AC webinar and remind you that SAC-AC will be in Atlanta this year, so if you haven't done your registration, don't miss out on that piece. Thanks again, and I am going to turn it over to Ms. Catherine Hare to begin introductions.
Perfect. Thank you, Erin, and thank you all for tuning in. As Erin said, my name is Catherine Hare. I'm an Assistant Dean of Admission at Davidson College in North Carolina, and I also graduated from Davidson in 2014. This is my fourth year in the office, and specific to this presentation, have been in charge of several events kind of throughout my tenure. So thank you guys again for tuning in. Hopefully this will be helpful.
Good afternoon. My name is Jessica Ramm. I am an Associate Director of College Counseling at Holy Innocents Episcopal School in Atlanta, Georgia. Prior to my time at Holy Innocents, I was at another independent school in Atlanta and also worked at Emory in the Office of Admission, my alma mater. Fun fact about this trio of presenters is that we were faculty at Dry Run together this summer, and we had such a good time that we wanted to continue presenting together. So a plug for more SAC-AC activities in Dry Run and how connections continue to be made.
Hi everyone, I'm Rashmi Anand. I'm a Senior Admission Advisor at Oxford College of Emory University, which is also my alumnus and alma mater, where I'm an alumnus and this is my alma mater. And Jessica and I actually worked together for a little while at Emory. I'm so excited that all of you could join us today. I've worked in different areas of campus programming since I started here in 2014 and have most recently moved into our larger admitted student preview days as well as counselor outreach here at Oxford.
Great, so we can go ahead and jump into our presentation for you guys. So full disclosure, this presentation was themed after Hamilton. We've taken out a lot of those references, but that was kind of the rationale behind the title. And Rashmi is going to kick us off.
Hi everyone, sorry about that. So one of the things that we wanted to do is give a quick rundown of different types of campus events. We'll be using two of our own events here as just examples as we walk through our presentation today. The first is Discover Davidson and the second is Fall for Emory. We'll also be talking a little bit about admitted student preview days as they take place here at Oxford College. Open houses are really just general showcases of the school. They can of course be tailored depending on your audience. So prospective students versus admitted students, totally different audiences, and we'll talk a little bit about crafting your schedule to meet the needs of each of those two audiences as we move forward. Same thing goes for underclassmen versus seniors. Student fly-in programs can take place in the fall or spring. Many of these can be scholarship weekends, which often have entirely different formats to them as students undergo interviews with faculty and staff members. And you may find yourself noting down that, hey, I oversee a couple of these, but not other types of events. And hopefully the tips and tricks that we share today are things that can be applied to multiple types of programming that you oversee on campus. Alumni programs are a little bit less of what Catherine and I do and what Jess has done in the past, but still tend to fall under the same realm here. So moving forward, let's go ahead and if you have your cell phone or if you're at a computer, we're just going to do a quick poll here. Just want to get an idea of who's with us today in the webinar. But if you'll text my name followed by 560 to 37607, or you can also respond online to the poll. We'll just give you a couple moments to go ahead and get into that. And then we'll ask a series of questions, again, just to determine who's in our audience today. So our first question is, what size is your typical event? And you can just respond by texting or entering A, B, C, or D. So option A, for those of you that are texting in, is under 100 total attendees. This is students plus guests. Option B is 100 to 200 total guests and attendees. Option C is 200 to 500 total. And option D is 500 plus. Okay, so it looks like the vast majority of you all are in the 200 to 500 range, which is great. That's actually where our sizes are here at Oxford. So we'll talk a little bit about what that means for the types of events that you're running. For those of you that are having trouble keeping up or maybe aren't able to get in, if you go to your chat function, you'll notice that the link to the poll has also been posted there. So the next question that we have is about overnight visits, which tend to be sort of a species on their own. So the first option is if you don't host overnight visits at all, your institution just doesn't do them. That's A. B is for prospective students only. C is admitted students only. And D is if your institution hosts them for both. Okay, and it looks like an overwhelming majority of us do not host overnight visits at all. And that can be, again, dependent from school to school and based on the policies over your school's visit programs, but overnight visits do tend to be a little bit more work. And the final question is, how many admitted events do you host annually? We include all types of preview day or open house events under this. Option A is only one event for the whole year. Option B is 2 to 4 events. Option C is 4 to 6 events. And option D is 7+ events for admitted students. This is a particularly interesting time for this question as we're sort of entering the busy part of our season with yield events and admitted student programming. And based on responses, it looks like about half of us host 2 to 4 admitted student events annually. Next highest is 4 to 6. Okay, well, thank you all for participating in that. I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Jess to talk a little bit about types of events again.
As Rashmi said, the think you lost my audio there. I'm sorry about that. As Rashmi said, this is especially timely given that admitted student yield events are coming up. So whether you're planning an event for April or reflecting on events that you've done in the past, this presentation will hopefully give you some tools that you can use right away. And we're going to look at pre, during, and post-event communication strategies and tools. And Catherine's going to go ahead and get us started with the pre-event information.
I am. Thanks, Jess. So trying to get to here we go. Communication with registrants, obviously important at all 3 phases of the event. If any of you all are Slate users, you'll notice I kind of sprinkle some utilization of Slate throughout just to give you an idea of how we have used that tool in the past. For those maybe not as familiar, Slate is a CRM through which you can do a lot of different things, communication being one of them. But I found it's most helpful for these larger events to give them a confirmation immediately. So right after they hit submit, as you all know, students and parents, guardians, mentors love to get that immediate confirmation so they know that they are indeed registered for your event. But I also find that it's helpful 1 week out, especially for those students using Discover Davidson as a case study who might register or have someone register for them, as we know is sometimes the case in the summer. The event isn't until October, so giving that reminder 1 week out is helpful for them. I've also started actually utilizing text, so jumping down a few things through Slate to text students specifically the evening before the event. So if Discover Davidson starts at noon, I've been texting students obviously with their permission around 7 p.m. the night before, just with final reminders. So you'll see a screenshot of what that looks like in a minute. So immediately 1 week out, I tend to overshare information. So everything from parking to what to expect the schedule to look like during the day to what the weather is supposed to look like, even if that means, bring your umbrella or make sure you packed a coat or whatever it is. And that is, I think, what ends up being fewer questions when they actually get there because they're well equipped even before they arrive on campus. The email I do send to students and parents or guardians, mentors, text, I usually just reserve for the students as they're the ones giving their express permission for that text. During the event itself, social media takeovers, I think, can be effective both in terms of Twitter, Instagram, Snapchat we haven't used as much, but having just one consistent hashtag for the day, kind of track energy, see what different people are doing. If there are Slate users out there and you are using text, you'll know that those texts can be monitored through the inbox feature. So just one tip kind of in terms of communication during the day, I usually have someone with their computer open. Sometimes I find text stations are helpful if the event guide ends up being online. So having someone actually monitor that text inbox. So as students have questions throughout the day, they can text the inbox and someone is there live monitoring and being able to respond to them. So this next slide is actually an example of what a text would look like to one of those students coming for the event. And again, this is through the Slate platform. So just looking forward to seeing you. Registration opens at 8:30. If you're driving, park in Baker Sports Complex. And then obviously communication after. I find follow-up surveys can be really helpful. I try to send those within 24 hours of the event's conclusion when it's still fresh in the students' minds. So that is just another, and we'll show you an example of a survey that we've used a little later on, but that's just kind of basic outline of communication there. I can also, I think Rashmi and I are going to share this one. So staffing, obviously different types of staff to consider as you're going about planning these events. So broadly, students, faculty, and then the admission and financial aid staff. So students, obviously in the form of tour guides, minglers, club leaders, panelists, performers. I find that, again, those reminders are going to be key. You'll often ask them, early September for events later in the fall and they'll forget. So a reminder, usually I find those are most effective coming from their peers. So I know we have students who work in our office, so I usually put our student workers in charge of the student outreach piece, as that is actually a name and a face that they know, as opposed to who's this random Catherine emailing me from the admission office. So actually, I usually give our student workers ownership of the student staffing. Rashmi, do you have anything to add about that?
Really just, and I think Jess may touch upon this as well, really, you want to be mindful of what you're telling your students to do versus what you're telling your staff to do. That it goes in terms of dress code as well. What type of vibe are you trying to give off for your event? How does that differ from students to staff? Really designate someone to be runner if needed. So one of the things that we do is we actually allow for individualized appointments with financial aid advisors as a part of our day towards the end. And rather than just having our financial aid advisors be mobbed towards the end of the event, we actually pre-assign, we have them sign up for different time slots, and somebody runs people back and forth so that our financial aid advisors don't have that added to their plate as well. So just really making sure that you have all of your bases covered, even as it comes to giving a break for our internal staff here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I would add, in addition to maybe having that student runner, I find it's really helpful to have someone on my staff to be on call, to be that runner. So kind of dropping down to that admission and financial aid staff assignments to think about, something will inevitably come up that you didn't foresee. And so having someone who is just as familiar as you are with that schedule, I find can be really helpful to be able to say, hey, can you run back to the office and get my name tag? Or can you, take this family over to the financial aid office, like Rashmi just mentioned. I find that, I learned this the hard way my first year planning Discover Davidson. I didn't have a group text among my staff set up, and I didn't have everyone's numbers in my phone. So another tip we'll give in a minute is to convene the whole staff who's working the event about an hour before the event is supposed to start. And I usually use that time to give out my cell phone number to them in the event that they need me throughout the day, and also to have a group text with them set up. So if someone's like, hey, I have a student at Wall who's lost, is anyone over there? I find that's an effective means of communication during the event itself. So that, I think that colleague on call has been very helpful. And this is an example. I just kind of took a screenshot of what some of my staff assignments look like for Discover. They usually end up being, this is just a one-day event, so it usually ends up being about 3 pages, but you can see that I get pretty specific down to who is running registration, who's monitoring the doors to keep food and water out of there, to which of my staff members is going to be moderating the professor panel. So just to give you guys an idea of the template that's worked for me. So just an example.
One thing that I think I'm on.
You are.
One thing that we talk a lot about in crafting events from both sides of the desk is setting intentions for the day, whether that's through your dress code and portraying the type of campus vibe that is more casual, or this is a more formal event. Who is your audience? We've got some good old Emory throwback pictures here from events of blue and gold, but from everything from dress code to signage to the text you send, creating authentic experiences and setting your intentions for the day, because at the heart of it, you're having these events for students and their families, and everything is a reflection of the school in that day. And students pick up on that. So thinking about all the steps and the goals that you're setting as you plan these parts of the program, which Rashmi is going to talk a little bit more about now.
All right, so we'll actually spend a little bit of time later on talking about how to craft the schedule, what that looks like when we're working with admitted students versus prospective students. But one of the things that Jess mentioned is that we're always tasked with creating authentic experiences for our visitors, and this is particularly important, right, when it's students on campus and when they're admitted students more so as we're nearing that month of April. So one of the things that we've all found it really accessible to do and has really added a level of authenticity to our event is either to imitate one of our ongoing campus events, or to even integrate that into the days, into the program of the day. So one of the things that you'll notice is on the left-hand side of your screen, you've got a picture of, it's a student showcase. It's a students' activities fair with performers that is traditional to Discover Davidson. And on the right, you'll see Wonderful Wednesday, which is an ongoing weekly event, takes place every single Wednesday on our Emory campus. And we actually integrate that into a portion of our campus programming. So it allows them to walk around and see what students really are doing when they're not in class with us at Emory. Well, it does cut down on some of the work. Just be aware that you are notifying the host of those events, that you're going to have your attendees there, prepare them with things like head count so that they can make sure they have enough student staffing at their event and enough materials at their event. While it might cut down work in the long run, just keep in mind that you're going to have to build out the rest of your schedule around the bones of that event. So if that event, it takes place from 12 to 2 every single Wednesday, then the rest of your programming needs to make sure that it needs to be set around that. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what to expect before the event. So in terms of space, I heard in the past that this is a huge concern for many, many schools, and including for us. Space is something that you want to reserve well in advance. I think this goes for all schools, regardless of how accessible space can be for you. On a campus like ours, where we don't always own the spaces that we're using, we want to make sure that we are out there getting those spaces before everyone else does on campus, and of course, when appropriate, releasing those to other parties on campus that might require them. We typically like to know where our bathrooms are, so that's something that I highly encourage regardless of what space that you are using on campus. Know where your bathrooms are, know the capacity of the space, because ultimately this is going to impact the size of your event. So for example, Discover Davidson has a max registration of 750, and that's based on the space of their locations. Conversely, our Oxford College event has our Oxford Chapel, which is our largest space on campus, actually has about a space of 250 people, 200 to 250. So we're definitely talking about condensing down registration limits for that, and thinking about doing things like renting tents to make sure that we can accommodate all of those who are interested. I would always keep in mind no-show rates. So if you are new to events and you're taking over from somebody else, see if they have information on no-show rates in the past. This is something that's pretty easy to run from Slate. Obviously, things like admitted events, your show rates are going to be much, much higher than they would be for a prospective student event. So typically, if you know that there's a space of 200 people and you know it's a prospective event, you can typically set your registration limit significantly higher than that, versus if it's an admitted event, you're going to be pretty close to that 200 number. So one other thing that I'd like to talk about for registration is for wait lists. And so with wait lists, Slate does have a function for you to just automatically enroll people off of the wait list as other attendees cancel, which can be very, very helpful. But perhaps you'd also like to man your own wait list, in which case you can just keep a running list from that, run the query from Slate, and pull students off as you see fit. Catherine had mentioned reaching out to students individually and letting them know things like the weather. One of the things that we do here is actually run a calling campaign about 3 to 4 days before the event. So I'll just gather a group of students, treat them to dinner, and they're just calling students that are on the list in the evenings. I think this depends on whether you're going to be hosting a student event or a counselor event, but one of the things that you want to think about is timing. So what time of day are they going to be able to actually answer your phone call? We also have noticed that it makes it a little bit more flexible. Let's say you're running that calling event, to not post a formal schedule out there initially. So if you do have to move sessions around, you have the flexibility to do that internally before you share that schedule with the public, because usually what happens is you're going to call a student and they'll ask you, okay, what can I expect on the day of? If you haven't already put something out there, it's easier to say, okay, here's where we are 72 hours before the event, because that's much more likely to be finalized. On the day of, I would also think about things like preparing an emergency box, knowing exactly where that is on the day of, making sure it's accessible for all of your staff members, make sure they all know where it is. Assign someone to run faculty tech. So if you know that your faculty panelists are requiring things like AV, they're planning on using slides or a presentation, make sure you have somebody on point specifically for those needs. The last thing you want to be doing is running to your computer to be able to answer faculty emails as you work through the event. Some folks find it helpful to run a golf cart or an LSV if needed. Our department doesn't actually own one of those, so we share with some of our other colleagues here on campus. I would also know when your sign is going up, and signs are going up for your event. So if it's parking signs or check in here, make sure you know exactly what time those go up and exactly what time they come down, and assign somebody to go around campus and bring them all down. Count them before they go out and count them when they come back as well. The last thing I'd say is keep the numbers of your facilities and tech manager on hand. You want cell phone numbers, you want office numbers, and you want to distribute that to your entire staff so that you're not the person that's being called every single time AV isn't working or every single time there's a tech issue. So let's talk a little bit about crafting the schedule. So one thing I would always note is, what are your institution's priorities for this? I think it can be really, really helpful to look at your school's mission statement or vision statement and use that as a guiding part of the schedule. Again, consider the type of event in the audience context. You're going to have very, very different events for a prospective, or different types of conversations for prospective students versus admitted students. And again, underclassmen versus a junior and senior, depending on where they are in that search process. I think the biggest thing these days is absolutely showcasing your academic programs and how you and your institution deliver those in a unique way. So more and more, this is becoming the differentiating value proposition of a school. So you have to find a way to showcase those academic programs, regardless, I think, of what event you're putting on.
Yeah, so Rashmi and I put together examples just of what those two events that our institutions host look like, just to give you an idea when we think about crafting the schedule. And we say separating students and families, what does that really mean? So for this particular event, which is just for they're seniors, but prospective students still at this time, we keep families and students together for the first, I'd say, half of the program. So everything from the opening from our president, we have them pick, usually they have 5 or 6 academic presentations to choose from, just based on where those interests lie. Usually what I've started doing on the registration form, and again, this is another great feature of Slate. If anyone wants to talk about Slate offline, hit me up, love Slate. I have actually started to list the 5 to 6 academic panels that they'll have to choose from and have them pre-register. Obviously, they're not locked into that necessarily, but it helps to be able to have a conversation with the faculty member before the event starts to say, of the 300 students registered, 150 signed up for the importance of Thoreau's Walden Today presentation, just to give them an idea. And I think that's been helpful for the faculty as well. We do try to separate students and families and mentors for the different panels. So the Q&A with current students, we try to keep just for those prospective students, and then we try to offer an alternative for families and mentors. And we found a soft close the last few years has been really effective. So instead of having everyone gather back in kind of the formal sit-down performance hall, we have just kind of put out a bunch of snacks in the union atrium, and it's, their current faculty and students, and obviously our staff is there as well to answer questions they have as they leave. So if they're done for the day, they can just be done and head back home. But if they do have follow-up questions to ask, they can grab a snack, and then there are people at their disposal to answer those questions. So I found that the soft close has worked really well for us in the context of this event.
So I'm just going to walk through a little bit of the Oxford College Admitted Student Day preview schedule. On your left, you'll see it's a little bit more zoomed in, and on the right, you can see what the full insert looks like. So it's not on a full sheet of paper. We actually keep it pretty small so that it fits inside our visit booklets. So walking through the day's events, you can see that we actually keep our students and their families together for the first session of the day, which is really just a welcome. We tend to pre-assign our students to their specific sessions rather than having them register or pre-register for the different sessions that they want to be a part of, really because all of our students are experiencing the same things. The only place where it's different is the academic session piece, which is the first place where our students and our families are broken up. I think if we at Emory allowed our visitors to just register when they arrived, we would see an overwhelming majority of our students moving towards one academic discipline, and we want to make sure that we see a good number across the board for our different sessions. So while our students are actually learning and experiencing the academic components, parents are actually hearing about it in a little bit more of a panel style setting with different faculty members. And then again, in the next session, while students are out there talking and hearing and connecting with their future classmates and with current students, parents are actually learning about the different resources that are available on campus. Everything from, we used to call the session Admission and Friends. So it used to be someone from admissions, someone from health services. We bring folks from college, from career counseling and mental health services, as well as residential life. So really just making sure that families are as aware as possible about the different resources and who the point person for those things would be when their students are on campus. We do bring our parents and our students back together for a closing session. We tend to do our closing before we go to lunch and the campus tour to make sure that all of our families do have a chance to hear from the Dean of Oxford College, who does tend to participate in this. So if you can get someone in senior leadership involved as a part of your event, I think that really helps add a nice note towards the end of the day, or even at the beginning of the day if you want to kick off on that note. As Catherine said, we tend to do a little bit more of a soft closing at Oxford. We found that works really well. After the tours come back, we dismiss tours from lunch, and as they come back, we offer them the option to meet with someone from financial aid individually. They cannot sign up for those events before the start of the day or at any point during the day. Instead, they do need to come see us in the library towards the end so that we can keep a running list, and again, so that it's not a strain on our financial aid advisors' time.
One thing with both Davidson and Emory's events that you saw on the schedule is kind of this a la carte, choose your own adventure. If you've been here before, if this is your first visit, there's something for everyone. And I think something that we've talked about keeping in mind is, how do you insert fun in the day? There's a lot of planning and there's a lot of back-to-back sessions, but how can students and families get an authentic feel for what's it like to just be a student here and to hang out? So maybe like Emory and Oxford, like Rashmi said, there's an activity that you can build your schedule around. So maybe that means instead of having your event on a Saturday, you offer it on a Wednesday when the campus tradition is going on. Or on the Oxford schedule, it said snacks with swoop, where there was a little bit of downtime for families and students to breathe, to check out their surroundings, and to have fun with the other admitted or prospective students. I would encourage you all to think, especially as if you have admitted student days coming up, thinking about how students can have fun if they've been to your campus before, if they are familiar with this campus, or if it's their first time. So differentiating the activities you provide and making sure there's some fun elements to it as well.
Great. So again, for those of you more familiar with Slate, this is going to be a page that probably looks familiar to you. So just an example of what an event template looks like from the Slate interface. So it allows you to actually set limits, which is this that fourth tab over. As you can see, it's details, location, description, and then limits. So if you do know that your performance space has a capacity of 750, you can set that limit. And then as soon as that limit is reached, you can display a custom limit message to inform registrants that Discover Davidson or that your event is full. And it also allows you to have a waitlist limit, as you can see on that second panel below. We also had some tips and tricks to share with you specific to when the event is happening. So one thing Rashmi and I have alluded to is holding an all-staff meeting 1 hour before the event is scheduled to begin, particularly if you are planning, orchestrating an event in the fall and your staff is traveling and never actually in the same space for maybe more than the 24 hours this event is taking place. I have found that all-staff meeting 1 hour before the event is scheduled is helpful, just to be able to go over the schedule with everyone and just kind of anchor people, make sure they know where they need to be at any given time. I'm going to show you an example in this next slide of how I keep track of where everyone is supposed to be, which again, I found to be helpful. Thank you, Excel. Another tip would be to have a hard copy of the registrant list in your master binder, just in case anything goes wrong with the technology. You do have another means of checking those people in. So an example of this staff schedule, this is just something that I crafted internally that is helpful for me. So you can see, those first 12 or so lines are the staff, my staff that I know will be there. So the top row, you can see I've outlined what is happening for the visitors throughout the day. And then for each staff member, I've outlined where I have slated them to be for, that 7-hour time slot. So I know, if the student comes in late at 2:45 p.m., I can look at my spreadsheet and see, okay, Chad is available to walk the student or escort the student to wherever they need to be. So this is something I shared at Dry Run that we got good feedback on, but it's not something I typically share with everyone on staff. I think they see it and go, oh, colors. But it is helpful for me just to have as the day is happening. Another important note during the event is to make sure to feed your staff. We all know we get cranky when we're hungry, so having alternatives for those staff, being aware of dietary restrictions as well. And make notes for improvement as you go. I've found often if you wait until the day after or 2 days after to think about, what went well, what didn't go so well, it's almost hard because you get so caught up in the day. So inevitably people on your staff will come up and say, this didn't go so well. Or if families will do that as well. So I usually have a page in the master binder for improvements to make a note of. Rashmi, did you want to talk about drop-ins?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things that I like to do is have a game plan for any drop-ins that are going to come by. I think this is especially true with admitted students where we don't know that they're coming, they haven't registered, and then on the day of, here they are, they've walked in to check in and registration. And so I mentioned earlier that we assign our students to the session that they'll be attending, especially for that academic piece. I like to make sure that one of those locations is slightly larger than the other location, so any drop-in that I have is automatically assigned to that location, and they stay with that group in that rotation the entire day. And I think with drop-ins, you especially want to make sure that they feel included as a part of the event. And so for us, we always talk about hospitality being the biggest part of what we want to emulate and what we want to be showing our guests. So make sure that you are going with the flow, that you have those extra name tags, they can write them in, you've got stuff for their family if their family is showing up. So this can also mean buying and making sure you're prepared with extra swag if you're handing out little goodies at the end of the event. Just make sure that you have extra stuff on hand. And then afterwards, we'll see that we always are trying to send thank you notes to everyone who's involved. We tend to give out small little tokens of appreciation to all of our faculty and staff and campus partners who have assisted us throughout planning an event or executing an event. So just make sure you immediately add those folks to a list. I just keep multiple Excel docs with every single event and who exactly has assisted with it so that no one gets left off at the end of the year. I always like to assign somebody to do a walkthrough of the spaces that we've been in, every single space. I think this is a really great job for student staff to be working on. And just do a quick walkthrough of the event, especially if you know that your group is moving out of that and won't be there, that space and won't be there for the rest of the day. They can immediately take a look at it and just make sure it's clean, reset it to how it's supposed to look, so that you continue to have allies and campus partners who are willing to assist you with future events. Always ask for improvement suggestions from staff. Typically in surveys, we'll of course ask our attendees, but our staff are the ones that are really behind the scenes, and if they see something could be made a little bit more efficient or could be running a little bit more smoothly, just make sure that they are taking notes throughout the day as well. As Catherine said, she likes to send that follow-up survey about 24 hours after. As soon as you can get it out is the best. So what we'll do is we actually send out our survey. It's linked to about 3 hours after the event concludes. They should get a survey from us as they walk out the door. I always recommend share the results of that survey with whoever is managing your student staff. So whether that's the tour guide supervisor, someone in the visit center, they're always going to want to know how their students are doing. So just make sure that that you're pulling specific results for how the student staff were and send those on to the appropriate person.
Yep, and this is just an example of our follow-up survey for one of our events. So Qualtrics is a great tool if your institution has an agreement with Qualtrics. Slate has some survey capability, but I wouldn't say it's as advanced as something like a Qualtrics tool at this point. And so Qualtrics will actually track all of the survey results for you and do all of the data analytics. So just getting a sense of different points of the program, and again, sharing those results with the staff who are working and also the students. That's really positive feedback for them usually. And that's a positive reinforcement, I think, for them as well.
Now that we've walked you briefly through, very quickly actually, the before, during, and after, some tips and tricks for events, some thoughts from the high school side and working with juniors and seniors and things that they come back and tell us after they've done their visits, is be cognizant of how long your guests are sitting, especially in one room. We all know that there are space limitations, but try and think about that before you plan your program. So if there's only one room on campus that can hold 200 students, maybe you have a smaller event and you cap the number of people. With that being said, really pay attention to the size of your event in relation to the size of your student body. If you have a small, authentic, lovely event, that is reflecting in your community. You don't want an event to double the size of your student population. You want students to feel like this is what it would be like to go here. So making sure that the total number of people on campus, your visitors and your students, is thought out ahead of time. Some small things that we always hear great feedback on that so many schools do well, but little things that can make the difference. Having backup locations for weather, umbrellas, lots of water, especially if you have events in the hotter months, especially in Georgia. Both Davidson and Emory have lots of water on hand for their events. But some of the things we've already talked about, thinking about various audiences. For parents who are attending with their students, for students who are attending for the first time, for siblings that may be on these tours, thinking about the different audiences you might be able to capture in addition to your primary audience. And like Rashmi and Catherine have both said, maximizing current student involvement. The more that students can be paired with other students, the more authentic the experience is going to be. With that being said, I actually asked some of our seniors at the end of last spring what were their favorite things about events and what tips and tricks would they give to everyone on the college side. And here are some fun quotes from them. Be memorable. I learned the most from students. And one of my favorite, make it so you can't learn more from the internet than being on campus today. And I think this was incredibly insightful because all the admission offices now, everyone has an admissions Snapchat, Instagram, Facebook, blog, and students are using it, which is great. They're connecting with your institution and a platform that they're comfortable with so that when they finally arrive on campus in person, what is it that they can't learn from following your blog or your Instagram account or chatting with your admission interns? Are there ways that you can incorporate things that aren't on your website, that aren't on the internet, to make that visit even more worth the while? So some fun thoughts from our seniors as they've come to these events. As we wrap up, I know there have been some questions throughout the presentation, so I'll get us started on those. Feel free to go in the chat or the Q&A box to ask questions, and I'll get us started with one that was asked earlier. And Catherine, if you could answer this, how do you use the texting feature in Slate and maybe some other cool features in Slate that you've used for your events?
Okay, sure. So yes, I would, two things come to mind in terms of cool features. The first of which is that texting feature. You have the option to purchase credits through Slate, and essentially you just use the same Deliver module. If you are familiar with Slate and use Deliver, you'll see when you click on Deliver on the right-hand side, there's an SMS inbox option. And at the time that you purchase those credits, your Slate account is assigned an SMS number. And so that is the number that students can use to actually text your office internally. And there are some really good webinars that Slate has prepared on texting as well. And then all of those texts come in actually through the Slate interface. So you just monitor the SMS inbox in the same way that you would monitor your email inbox if you're using that inbox feature. You know what I'm talking about, but it looks very similar to sending actually emails through Slate, is the texting thing. But my email address is coming up, so feel free to email me. I'm happy to connect one-on-one about that.
Another question.
Another cool feature I was going to say too that we've used, sorry if I just cut you off, for events, on the event page, when you're checking students in, I've set it up to display not only their name, but also their high school state, how many people are coming with them. If we give them an option to pre-register for one of those 5 or 6 academic panels, just so we can actually see as soon as they check in, like, oh, hi Rashmi, you're from Georgia, and I know your counselor, and I was just in your area. So that kind of extra level of personal touch is helpful right on that registration page, which I think has been great.
I just want to make a quick note about one other capability that Slate has that I think a few other schools are using. I think it's especially helpful with the text feature that we were talking about, but this is geofencing, where you can set up your school's address or your institution's address, and as attendees who have opted in for their cell phone number to be used come within, like, let's say a mile radius or a 2 mile radius of your school, you can actually send them a text saying, hey, we're so glad that you're getting close to campus. Just as a reminder, here's where to plan to check in, and here's where you should go park. I think that could be really helpful, especially so that you don't have students scrambling to pull up their email as they pull onto campus to make sure that they're parking in the right location, as we all know that can be an issue. But that geofencing thing can be really, really helpful. And again, as Catherine said, if they have questions, they can reply back to your office's SMS number, and you can respond through that inbox.
Looks like there's no other questions that have been asked. If you do have questions about any of the programs or Catherine's beautiful master spreadsheet for tests, feel free to email us. We're happy to share that information. And I think we're going to turn it over to Erin for some final SAC stuff.
Thanks, everybody. So thank you again for joining us today as we learn a little bit more about on-campus events. As a reminder, we will make these slides available on the SACAC website, so you'll be able to tune in later this week and check out the slides if you missed any important information or you want to share this with other individuals in your offices. And just a reminder that next month on March 25th, so a month from today, we'll be offering our next webinar. If you've ever wondered how to conduct a sensitivity training in your office or wanted to go through one yourself, we'll have an amazing team of people from all over the Southeast coming together to share best tips and practices and to walk us through some of those exercises. So please be on the lookout for an upcoming registration link for that. And with that, enjoy the rest of your February. We hope you've had a great day. Take care.